Welcome to Voices That Represent, a podcast brought to you by Unveiled, Bridging the Gap to Sponsorship. This is Shahana Mukherjee, and as founder and president, I am thrilled to have you join us on this journey. In a world where opportunities are not distributed equitably, our mission is clear: to break the cycle of underrepresented groups being over-mentored and under-sponsored. Throughout this podcast series, we will delve into the stories and experiences that have been invisible for far too long. We aim to bring these voices to the forefront, making them visible in spaces where they have traditionally been absent. Equally important is the exploration of the role of sponsors, who play a crucial part in being a voice for those who often find themselves on the sidelines, unheard and unseen. Join us as we engage in thought-provoking conversations to navigate bridging the gaps to equitable access, one voice at a time. Voices That Represent is not just a podcast. It's a platform dedicated to fostering understanding, collaboration, and tangible, positive change.
Hi, everyone. This is Wanda Shore. I'm here with Voices That Represent, the Unveiled podcast. I am privileged to be accompanied by Jonathan Saw, a leader in the DEI space and a dear friend. So Jonathan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Wanda. Thanks so much for having me here. I am right now a D&I consultant, really focusing on corporate culture engagement. And I've led D&I, let's say, functions for companies as varied as Pernod Ricard and Tiffany Company, as well as being on leadership teams in D&I for Bank of America and Johnson & Johnson.
Great. Well, thank you for coming on to the podcast. I'm actually really interested in this topic. There's a lot of discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion right now, especially in the US. And having this conversation with you, being a leader in the DEI space, I would love to take the opportunity to just learn a little bit about what is happening within DEI, what are the things that we need to be aware of, and what are the opportunities that we're seeing as the world of DEI continues to evolve. So tell me, what is your perspective around the importance of DEI today?
DEI remains really important. And whether or not you use those letters or the acronyms or even diversity, the work that the best D&I programs have been doing has been about making it fair and equal to enter companies, to get promoted, to learn and develop. Also, it's all about creating a workplace culture that frankly just doesn't suck for anyone right, coming in, and what that entails. And I think the core of that still is integral to what companies are trying to achieve today. Now, what we're seeing today is, unfortunately, a narrow focus, I'm going to say, on certain types of programming in D&I. And I had a client who actually put it really, really succinctly. For D&I, we're not going to, quote unquote, program our way out of this. Meaning it's not about programs and programs and programs and programs that all of a sudden are going to fix things. That is why the best programs that I've seen, and partly including some of mine, are the ones that focus on the processes, the policies, the systems that make things fair, as opposed to things like just, we've created an ERG program, as important as they are. Oh, we've created a diverse internship program. Just a program after program after program just does not cut it. And that has really been the core of what the forward-thinking D&I people have done for a long time. But unfortunately, what's happened is that there's this focus on this or that program,
okay,
as opposed to the core of what we're trying to achieve, which is essentially a workplace that everyone gets ahead because of their talent and their effort.
Yeah.
And that's it, as opposed to who they know or that they look like.
Yeah, and actually that's a great distinction and understanding. We develop programs that have lens on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that diversity, equity, and inclusion is way beyond the programs. It's about ensuring that people have the right opportunities and that they are achieving the career advancement, and that we as leaders in the space, that we are seeing representation of the communities that we serve.
Absolutely. It's very interesting because I've always taken the tack that companies don't necessarily need to build a whole new program. Let's talk about a leadership program to get people to the director or VP level. Those programs already exist. And what I'm talking about in terms of looking at systems and processes versus a program is, instead of building a diverse leadership program that does exactly the same thing, why don't we look at the systems and processes of who has access into those programs, who is nominated into those programs, make them fair, et cetera, because that would then create the pipeline into a pipeline that already exists, as opposed to building this whole new thing and all the political capital that needs to go into it. All companies already have a program that is identified as the program that you have to get into to make it to the next level. How and what we do to evaluate the access of who makes it into those programs, and then on the front end, making sure that everyone has those opportunities to then be noticed to get into those programs. That's where the hard work is. And let me be clear, that is harder work. It is much harder work than creating a new thing, because there's already a vested interest. There's a lot of control about, like, if you're a VP and you've always gotten like 5 people from your team into the program, there's a lot of power dynamics into it. What I like to do when I work on these programs, stuff like that, is to eliminate all those power things and make it fair and equitable to get in. And then you don't have to create all of the new processes about this program. This diversity leadership program is just as good as the other program that we already have, that everyone's already bought into.
Yeah, and I like that. I think that it's important to think of it as, what are we doing to break down the system and ensure that people are actually having the opportunities to be selected into these prestigious programs that are really about developing leaders. I agree completely that the work is in ensuring that we're creating those opportunities and creating equitable access. But when you're thinking about it from a leader in this space, what do you think we still need to do? And how do we start to shift the system to allow for more of this opportunity to be available, especially for the underrepresented groups?
I think there's 2 facets here. Let's talk about the company one to start. The thing for companies is really to focus on the systems and processes and policies to make sure that they are fair and equitable. There's a picture that everyone uses, which I frankly do not like. It's the one where there's 3 people of different heights and they're trying to look into a baseball game. And the whole thing about fairness is the block is the same versus everyone gets a different block. And so that the shorter person gets the support they need to look into the game. Now, the reason I don't like that image is because it sort of says something about, we're looking for equality and equity in outcomes. The picture that I like, which I don't see enough, is it's a man and a woman on a race. And the man has a straight line and the woman has a squiggly line with a river and like air. And what we're talking about, or what we should be talking about from an equity perspective, is that, frankly, it doesn't matter the course. As long as the man or the woman should run either the straight ahead course or the one with the bear, but they both should run. And right now that's not happening. Let's just say that in many companies. And I think that one of the building blocks to actually make that happen is for companies to be transparent about what their processes are. It takes a lot of self-awareness and self-analysis. What is it that they actually value as a company? Is that being in person? Is that if you work at a company with lots of brands, regardless of what everyone says, to make it to the next level, do you have to work on one of the multi-billion-dollar brands or not? Let's be clear. If you have to work on a billion-dollar brand, for example, at like Johnson & Johnson or Diageo or something like that, if you have to work on one of the big brands, then transparency says you should say that, versus the whole rigmarole, the whole stories that companies tell each other that you can make it to the next level if you work on smaller brands, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But if the lived experience of people is not that, then you're just telling yourself stories. That's why I'm very much about focusing on being transparent about what it actually takes, doing the analysis of what we actually value, and then making sure that everyone does it. You've heard me tell the 32 hoops story, right?
Yeah.
When I work with talent organizations and things, I don't care if there's 32 hoops that people have to jump through to make it to the next level. As long as everyone jumps through 32 hoops and that you don't get credit for 30 hoops because you're related to the founder. What happens there is that that's the difference where people get hired for potential versus performance.
Yes.
And that builds just huge senses of inequity and fairness. We've all been in companies where either someone gets promoted or someone gets pulled in from outside after all of these internal people said, oh, well, you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this. And the new person or the person gets promoted doesn't have those things either.
Yes.
And so that's why I always want to talk about transparency in the processes is first. And frankly, it's so hard to do that because that sort of fuzziness is where the non-inclusiveness happens.
Yeah. And I think transparency is even more important because the newer generations coming into the workforce are expecting that as well. So from a cultural perspective, it is important that we also think about who are the people that we are developing as our future leaders and what do they need to feel, number one, pride as to where they work, but also feel committed and invested in from a perspective of being part of a supportive company and being part of a culture that you want to work in. And transparency is like the number one thing. Just kind of shifting a little bit. Voices that represent, we share stories about people's journeys and what it takes to be a really good sponsor and also what it takes to be sponsor ready as you're growing your career, especially for women or other underrepresented groups in the corporate world. So the two questions that I have, the first question is, what does a really great sponsor look like? Maybe some ideas or examples of leaders that you've seen that have done this really, really well. And what are the top 3 to 5 things that you see qualities in these leaders as they're helping other future leaders gain the experiences and opportunities to advance their career? I'll let you answer that question first.
Thank you so much for that, because earlier when I said that there's 2 facets to what companies need to do, one is what the company itself has to do, which is out the transparency and processes. But the other part is the role of the individual. And I'm so glad you asked about that. It's important that as individuals, and frankly, no matter where you are on the ladder, take some accountability for the things that you have to do to be ready for these opportunities. There's a little facet of what I call the dance for me issue, where people were like, okay, well, I'm not going to do anything until all of these changes happen in this company before I make any effort. Obviously, I'm overstating it.
Yes,
but, you do have to be performing at a level so that you can get noticed, so you're ready for those opportunities. But let's refocus it back on what makes a good sponsor. And I think at the core of this, and this is why a sponsor is so different than a mentor, a sponsor has to be willing to use some of their political capital in the organization to help their sponsee get ahead. Now, this is not the nepotism thing that I was talking about earlier. This is, I know this high-performing individual. I am their sponsor. When I am in rooms where they are not, I'm going to say, let's look at her. Let's look at him. I would absolutely nominate her because of X, Y, and Z. They have to know their sponsee, what they want to do, what their aspirations are, where their skills are, where their gaps are. So when there's an opportunity that come across their desk, they're like, we should use her. And what I mean here, using your political capital is it's not enough just throwing the name into the pile. It's not a random thing when people are chosen. So if you're a managing director or you're a VP, that you will actually put in that extra effort once that name is in at every step. It's really the willingness to use your political capital. Because if you're not, then you're just a mentor. And that's great. Everyone needs mentors. Everyone needs lots of mentors. Don't call yourself a sponsor if you're not willing to put your own skin in the game.
I think that's totally right. One thing that I like to say about sponsorship is it is one thing to make room at the table. That's important, basically equivalent to saying this person belongs here. But there's another thing to provide the support in the system and the surroundings to ensure that the person is successful once that room is made. The sponsor role is really that combination, that support, that thinking really carefully about how do I ensure that the surroundings of this leader who may have not had this opportunity before, to ensure that they are actually being successful and that the people around them are also supporting their growth. Creating space in the room or creating space at the table is step one. There's like all these other things that need to happen too.
I'll tell you a little story about just making sure, and this is where the equity comes in, making sure that the sponsee, particularly those who are diverse, are judged by the same standards as everybody else. So a couple lifetimes ago, I was up for a promotion. I had a boss who was also a sponsor, and it was amazing. And this was during a slight downturn in the market. This was back when I was in public relations, and companies were pulling back on their PR budgets, etc. And I got the promotion. And what I heard through the grapevine was that my sponsor / boss had advocated really, really hard for me. And very specifically, there were all these things that were being brought up in the discussion. Well, his budget was reduced by $500,000. Maybe he's not as good as he was. Because he knew me, because he knew the business, because he knew what was happening, he was like, let's put this in perspective here. Everybody else's budget was cut by 50%. His budget went from $2.5 million to $2 million. Mm-hmm. I think he's doing better. And the feedback that I got from the client, this is my boss saying that, the feedback I got from the client was that there's no way that we would have been able to protect even that much money if it wasn't for Jonathan, because we know that he's going to do the best out of it. And so this is the sponsor that knows you, knows your work, knows all the little things that, that little comment about the client, all those things, and be able to weave them together into a story in places and tables that you're not at. And also be an advocate, but also be that biased interrupter. You're focusing on the total amount that his budget was reduced as thing, and all these people didn't matter for them. So it either matters for them or it doesn't matter for Jonathan.
Yeah. And like you said, the sponsor has to know you. They need to understand your strengths, and they need to be able to advocate. And they need to also understand your areas of opportunities too, so that they can make sure that you're getting the right support system. So it's a real partnership and a relationship that has to be built. So that kind of leads us to what you were saying earlier, is that there's a lot of work that has to happen from an organization. There's a lot of work that has to happen from a sponsor or a leader that's sort of taking that role of advocating for you. And then there's a lot of work that the individual has to do to be sponsor ready. And you started to talk a little bit about that at the beginning. So let's go there. Maybe some things that you've seen really work well for these individuals in the past.
Performance is a non-negotiable. And I've had mentees, not sponsees, but I've had mentees say, oh, if only I had a sponsor, then I could perform well. Nope, not going to happen. You're not going to get a sponsor because you're not performing well. And maybe not performing well, but you need to shine in performance. That's a no-brainer. However, part of that, this is very true for many diverse communities, is being able to tell your story, being your own hype person. And I hate to use that TikTok language here.
I'm not on TikTok, so I don't know any other TikTok language. So.
Hype yourself up. But you have to be able to talk about your performance, your successes, etc., in a way that is relevant for the company and your boss, not in a way that's relevant for you.
Yeah.
Here's the difference. It's like, I put so much work into this, and that's why I deserve it. Versus, here's the things that we did. Boom, 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 boom. Here's the results that happened from this. Boom, boom, boom. Here's where I feel that since this is going to be repeating, how we can improve. And this is what I'm going to try next time.
Mm-hmm.
Very different. The first one is all about you. I did this. I feel I should get this. I put in so much work versus we achieved this for the company. That's the difference in telling the story.
I like that. I think what you're saying is demonstrate the value. What did we deliver for the company? Did we reach the outcomes that we were expecting? Did we achieve the goals that we set out to achieve? Number one. Number two, what did I learn? What were the opportunities there? And how did those challenges, obstacles, opportunities, how did they shape my thinking around what needs to happen next? And then third, what do I recommend we do? And it kind of positions you as I'm leading this, I own it, I know what I need to do, I've learned from this experience, I've also achieved success in this experience. And I think that being able to tell your story in that way is an important skill for everybody, not just people who are trying to get sponsors, but it does help in achieving advocacy and support from leaders who may be able to open doors for you. So I really like that.
You can't be the only one telling your story. So it's about creating the connections across your organization, and frankly, not just up, across, down, etc. So people talk about you in a nice way at your organization. And one thing that I tell a lot of mentees of color, I get a lot of I feel more comfortable, obviously, just being with my community. That is great. But you need to use that as a launching pad into making connections with people who don't look like you. This is something we tell leaders all the time anyways, but that's another part of the accountability, because let's face it, in most workplaces in the United States or in the quote unquote Western world, there are far more people who are white and male than not one of those. So the more relationships you have with them, the better off you're going to be. Don't silo yourself with just the people you're comfortable with, and go out and meet other people. And it seems like a really small thing to say, but that makes a difference. If people don't really know you or haven't heard of you, they're not going to go along or agree if your name comes up or something. There's a lot more facility to not go outside your comfort zone and meet other people anymore. Because one, you don't run into someone random in the office, obviously, because you're only in the office 2 or 3 days a week. And everything's very transactional, which is not relationship building.
Yeah, there's a lot of points in what you just said. The first thing that comes across is that broadening your network is so important. And that includes connecting with people who have similar experience as you. And that's great in terms of building long-term relationships or even friendships with people that you work with. Of course, we all are human and we're all going to be drawn to people who have similar experiences. That's normal. But it's so important to also broaden your network with people who don't have those experiences at all, because you learn from this and you gain perspective. You gain a different way of looking at things, and you can grow. And actually talking about real situations, something I like to do is I had this situation at work, and this is the decision we made, and asking, what would you have done in this situation, and kind of just getting a different perspective in general. So I think it's really important to do that. And I also hear is this idea of coming back into the workplace and being physically present in places, because that's where you actually build the connections. And maybe somebody that you may have met in a Zoom meeting, and then you're able to meet in person and broaden that connection, or even just enhance that connection because you now have a coffee together. And having social interaction is important as humans. So I like that. I know we're almost running out of time, so I want to make sure that I get this last question in. And if you were thinking about what would be the ideal scenario in this world, and I know that you have to be realistic, but just ideally, what would this space look like? What would we be trying to achieve from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint?
We would be in a space where everyone is very clear on what they need to do to be prepared to take the next step.
Yeah.
Right? It would be a world where when someone gets promoted, and this does happen sometimes at companies, when someone gets promoted, everyone in the company was like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Or when someone's brought in from outside, they're like, oh, I can see that he had all this and that additional thing that we were looking for that no one else in the organization has. Or that everyone's given the opportunity to stretch themselves and is all about getting the processes right. So again, it's about a world where people advance because of their capability and their effort.
Yes.
That's it. I'm very confident in saying that doesn't exist right now. It exists in pockets. We want that for everyone.
I think it's doable. Maybe I'm optimistic, but I do think it's doable. I think what you're asking for is, really straightforward, transparency and clarity on how people get to the places in their career and understanding of what it takes to be able to achieve that type of success. I think that's a pretty simple situation or ask of people.
We always talk about how leaders have to be more inclusive. We always talk about leaders have to pull in different perspectives. That's not just for leaders. That is for everyone. And that is what we mean when we say inclusion is for everyone. It is not just about leaders doing it. It's about you as an individual saying, okay, I'm a gay Asian guy. I got a lot of those friends. Right? At work, I need to make so many other friends because I'm not going to get ahead. I'm not going to achieve what I need to do just by talking to other gay Asian guys that work.
Yeah, exactly. We need to broaden our perspectives, our network, and that will broaden our opportunities as well and build those relationships and really make sure that we are consistently building the relationships along the way. So Jonathan, thank you so much. This was really, really insightful. I have enjoyed our conversation and I cannot wait to see what else you're working on in the next few months. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, you too.
Show us some love, like, subscribe, share, and tell us what questions do you want answered in a future episode.